Now, I'm very happy to introduce you to Mr. Muralee Thummarukudy, who is the director at the G20 Global Initiative Coordination Office of the UNCCD. Now, a bit of background on him. First, this man has helped humanity dodge more environmental disasters than you have probably dodged more emotional disasters when going for dinner with your in-laws. At least I have. Second is, this man is absolutely no joke. He has implemented response projects in over 35 countries. And before joining the UN, he was an environmental advisor for large corporations after doing a PhD in environmental engineering. Now, a man like that, you would think he has no time for anything else on the side. Well, that's exactly where you are wrong, because on the side, he's an award-winning author, and to top it all off, a social media influencer. So please welcome the man who's about to get about 6,000 more followers on whatever platform he chooses. And welcome with me, Mr. Muralee Thummarukudy.
Good evening. I'm extremely delighted to be on this stage. In fact, though I have been coming to the Start Global for a couple of years now, this is the first time I had the opportunity to be on this stage. The energy which I see in the Start Global, I do not see in many of the other events which I go routinely every year. But before I start, I want to ask you one question. How many of you have actually heard about the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification? If I could have a show of hands, please. I'm not surprised, because in 1992, more than 100 head of states came together in Brazil, and they started 3 conventions, international conventions, and they are called the Rio Conventions. The UN Convention to Combat Desertification, the UN Convention on Biological Diversity, and the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. And in preparation for this event, I thought I will do a Google check and see how much of this challenge the world is thinking about. So when we looked at Google, you can see that if you look at climate crisis, you see 509 million articles. And if you looked at biodiversity crisis, you get 68 million articles. Then you look at desertification crisis, and you see 2.9 million articles. So in 1992, the world leaders thought they are all very important crises, but 32 years later, the world thinks desertification crisis is probably not as important as the other 2 crises, which is not true though. Land is so fundamental to all of us. All of us, 100% of more than 7 billion humanity lives on land. Land provides 99% of our food. Land is a platform for more than 90% of our jobs. Land holds significant biodiversity. Land has locked in carbon. So if you look at the Sustainable Development Goals, you cannot achieve many of them without preserving land. And it is that land we are losing. The land crisis is real. Of the 4.8 billion hectares of agricultural land, 40% is degraded. Of the 4.1 billion hectares of forest, we are losing 4 million hectares per year. Mining degrades 10 million hectares of land. Urbanization across the world is causing more land to be converted. So the land crisis is real. But why? Why is that people are not thinking about it? why land is not getting the type of attention which biodiversity or climate change is getting. I was reflecting on this point, and then I thought about myself. And this is a picture of me in 1964 when I was barely 1 year old with my mom. And I was looking at my link to land at that point. I was living on a house on the land. I was drinking water from a well right next to my house. Our food, rice, was grown within 50 meters of my house. If I fell sick, my mom would go into the farm, pick up some sort of herb and mix it with something else, some turmeric or ginger, and made a concoction and gave it to me. And land is where I played, and land is where I took baths, and land was also where I took cash. Cashew nut was used in exchange of cash in those days. And land is where my father worked. So all around me, land was real. And if something happened to that land, it personally affected me. Now take 60 years later, that's me. My house in an apartment, no link with the land. Of course, it stays on the land, but I'm not connected to it. My water comes in a pipe. My food comes from the supermarket. Medicine comes from a pharmacy. I play on the computer, not on the land. My bath is in a bathroom. My cash is a credit card or even a Bitcoin. I work on an apartment on a high-rise building on the 20th floor. So I'm completely disconnected from land. And it's not just my story. An entire generation of people are disconnected from the land. And that is the real crisis. But this is changing. The land crisis is starting to be noticed. In 2020, when the G20 leaders met in Saudi Arabia, they decided that restoring degraded land is a major challenge for humanity, and they should invest in it. And they committed, the G20 leaders committed that by 2040, they would strive to reduce the land degradation by 50%. That would mean that they would restore 1 billion hectares of land by 2040. And this is no mean commitment. That would translate to about $1.5 trillion invested by 2040 in just 15 years. So about $100 billion per year going to go into this sector. And this is why we are now saying it's a land of opportunities. Land degradation and reducing land degradation is going to be a big industry in the coming 10 years. And we are already seeing signals of that. And that's one of the reasons why we are here, because we want to tell the young people that as much as technology is important, as much of artificial intelligence and startups, land could also be a platform for startup. You could still use modern technology, but you could use land restoration as your platform to build your enterprise and make money. And this is not just theory, it's already happening. I'll talk about Rio Green in Brazil. It's a startup. They have raised capital from the banks as well as the capital market to buy degraded land and restore it over the next 20 years and raise revenue. They have already started restoring 8,000 hectares of land, and they have a business plan to restore 1 million hectares of land. And we hope this can be scaled across the world. But this is not just alone. Let me talk about EcoPlanet. This is probably the first restoration multinational company. They are based in Kenya, but they have operations right around the world. Again, their business model is not based upon philanthropy. Their business model is based upon restoring land, providing consultation for restoring land, and making money in that process. Now let me talk about Muralee Hussain, who is actually here promoting his small enterprise called Iage, helping farmers in Bangladesh to increase the yield in their farm, at the same time creating revenue for himself. So we are seeing at very different scale, at a very local level in Bangladesh, work in multiple countries, starting in Kenya, and working with modern capital market and instruments in Brazil, all restoring land, catering to this new emerging industry called the restoration industry, which we think is a land of opportunities, which we want to promote. Now, there are other stars aligning with this. In addition to the G20 declaring that they would like to support up to 50% reduction in degraded land, the European Union has come out with a law just in February this year that by 2030, they would like to restore 30% of the land, which is in alignment with the global biodiversity framework of the UN Conventions on Biological Diversity. By 2040, they want to restore 50% of degraded land. And by 2050, they want to restore 90% of degraded land. So clearly, there's going to be massive opportunities in this domain. But what we notice is the technology is there, but the experts who are needed to implement this technology at scale across the world is just not there. So we want to create a large pool of experts, not tens of them, not hundreds of them, but hundreds of thousands of them around the world, working in all domains, be in agriculture, be in forestry, be in mining, be in urban restoration. But we also want to support young entrepreneurs to use land restoration as a way of building their business. So, in supporting eco-restoration as a career, and that's why again we are happy to talk to you, young people and also university people. We are working with 1,000 agricultural universities around the world to introduce a new curriculum on land restoration using agriculture. We are going to work with 300 forestry institutions around the world. We are going to work with 200 mining institutions around the world. We are going to work with urban planning institutions. In each of these undergraduate curriculum, we are hardwiring land restoration so that over the next 10 years, you have 1 million graduates graduating from around the world, from the developed countries, the developing countries, from the north and the south, from all the 5 continents. We will have a large pool of experts who can deal with land restoration. And in each of these training programs, we are introducing how to build a startup using land restoration as a tool to raise finances to enrich themselves. Last year, we partnered with the International Trade Center, another UN organization based here in Geneva. And we conducted a global competition to identify, are there people already working on land restoration and making money? And we got a pool of 87 companies from around the world. And we shortlisted 10 of them, and we chose 3 of them to be finally supported. 3 of them are here. Some of them probably may be in the audience as well. But this year we are going bigger. Our current call is out to get a bigger pool of young people who will be mentored, not just by ITC, not just by us. We have partnership with Google, we have partnership with Sidley, we have partnership with WIPO. So we are giving these young people the tools they need to develop new startups. Over the next 10 years, we want to support and mentor 10,000 young people to develop their startup using land as a platform and land restoration as the industry. And that's why we are saying is a land of opportunities. I want to thank you all for listening to me this evening and seeing land as a land of opportunities.